Okay. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Marisol Moreno, and I will be your Zoom host. Our presenter will get started shortly. This is a reminder to keep yourself muted throughout the presentation unless the presenter indicates otherwise. If you have a question, please use the raise hand feature, which is located in the reactions icon, or type your question into the chat. We will do a Q&A after the presentation. Please be aware that this presentation is being recorded and will be available for viewing after the conference. Live transcriptioning has been enabled. You can turn it on or off using the live transcript feature. You can change the view by clicking on the view button in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. We recommend the speaker view. At the close of the presentation, I will be putting an assessment survey in the chat. Please fill out the survey for each session you attend. With all that said, I will turn it over to the speaker to introduce themselves and start the presentation.
Well then, my name is Bruce Wardlow. I am the Open Educational Resources Librarian out at West Texas A&M. But unlike most librarians, well, at least librarians that were first school teachers, I did not teach English. I did not teach history. What I taught was physics. And there's some interesting things that I'm seeing that, are pretty universal, but might be illuminating if we frame them in sort of the idea of how a physics teacher would approach some of these instruction questions. Now, what you have before you is a comic from Saturday Morning Breakfast cereal that describes the wonderful process of trying to do physics homework. Now, when I first saw this, I thought, this is a really cool comic. However, I feel like it's the wrong subject. All of this iterative refinement and all of this screaming and naturally the desire to become a poet, to me, physics doesn't scream that. Instead, what screams that is the research process. If we look at this and we change a lot of these algebra issues for subject keywords and all of this fact checking and the fact that there is always another path of research to go and chase, I think there's actually a lot of really interesting parallels between research, academic reading, and the way we teach physics. Now, I will give some context to this presentation. I did originally give this presentation last summer for faculty. So for those of you that don't do a lot of teaching, you may get something out of it, you may not. I apologize. And if some of this seems like it's not really librarian oriented, that's because it's not. It was intended more for faculty, but I think that y'all might just get something out of it if you open up your mind. Okay. So going here next, I am in the incorrect page. Okay. So assume the book is a sphere. Lessons learned when a physics teacher turned librarian teaches academic reading. And yes, for all of you, you can neglect air resistance for the purposes of this presentation. Yes, I'm a nerd. My jokes are terrible. We're going to get there. So before I get started here, I'm going to talk about what is academic reading. So to me, academic reading is not just research skills, but it is the art of reading academic content, and not just reading academic content because you have a research paper to do, but reading academic content because it is fun and exciting. So finding and understanding written scholarly content, reading scholarly content even when not researching. And as a subset of academic reading, I'm going to include skills such as research, how to triage articles, skimming, motivating yourself to read, and just a whole bunch of different things. So what are we going to do? We're going to talk about how physics and academic reading are related. We're going to go through some strategies. Limit the scope, ground your lessons on life outside of school, repeat to build pattern recognition, intentionally teach and include skills, advertise science, reward effort, and then we're going to go into a summary. So that gives you a general idea of what we're going to go through. However, we are going to have a whole bunch of activities and pseudo-rhetorical questions. So for this activity, we're going to make this first activity, we're going to make some word clouds. We are going to see how you all feel about some things. So I am going to go ahead and pull up this slide. So if you all want to go to menti.com and then use code 34615281, I'm going to go ahead and drop that link here in the chat. For this first word cloud, describe the difficulty of physics. What words do you use to describe whether physics is hard or easy, or I'm sure there are quite a few people. Impossible, that's a good one to start off with. What else can we go for? Daunting, that's a good one. Hard, abstract, confusing, foreign. Oh, there's some really good ones in here. Skipped it. Do not blame you. Not one bit. Why? Extreme, impossible. Doctor Who. It's a nice one. Esotericism. I see. Math. Fascinating, interesting, excellent. So it seems like in here we have kind of a trend, although we've got a quite sizable mix. Most people would say physics is a bit on the challenging side. Arduous, there's a good word. So now what we're going to do is we are going to go to this next slide. Ooh, mysterious. I like that one. How would you describe the difficulty of academic reading? Things like research, things like reading scholarly articles. What do we think about that? Dense. Excellent. Tedious. Okay. Rewarding. Wordy is a good one. Complicated, drawn out. Easy once you learn it. I love that. Stream of consciousness. Time consuming. Headaches. Unavailable. Again, esotericism. We've got yawn, unavailable, needlessly verbose. The code is up here at the top, 34615281. Okay, we got some difficult in here. Okay, we've got some complicated. We got manageable, though, rewarding, obligated, fulfilling, fascinating, slow going. That's a good one. So on a lot of this, if we look at this, we've got some challenges. But whereas this one seems to be more difficult about actually doing it, when we look at academic reading, it seems much less difficult and much more hard to motivate yourself. So my question to all of you now is, if you like to use the chat, please, why do you think that is? Why do you think we've got physics being difficult or impossible, and then academic reading just being wordy, tedious, not necessarily difficult, but long and drawn out? Because it's academic law, okay? We've got some math, okay? We actually will talk about that later on, the role of math in all of this. reading feels natural. No, it does not. I disagree with you strongly, but I can see where you're coming from on that one. Mathematics versus lots of words, depending on your discipline. Absolutely, absolutely. Um, to me, academic reading and physics, there's a lot of processes. See, I would assume those in this profession typically prefer academic reading to math. Math versus reading, math isn't my strong part. You have to think harder about it. I love that. Academic writing often writes to other knowing academics more for showing off than informing the uninformed. That's a very good response there, Patrick. But to me, academic reading and physics, they're both processes. They're both processes that seem pretty obscure, but as you break down some of the things that you do, you can actually draw out some ways to make life easier. With a lot of this academic reading stuff, if you just break it down, then you can really change a whole lot of things. So let me go back to my PowerPoint here. Okay. Why do people think academic reading is easy? Well, it's something that's kind of always confused me. But let's talk about how I see the world of academic reading, having been forced to teach a whole bunch of juniors and seniors in high school how to do physics. So we're going to get into the strategies. And as we do these strategies, there's going to be a lot of pseudo-rhetorical questions. They can be rhetorical if they need to be, but if you all want to add some comments in the chat about some of the things that you think about and some of the things that you feel as I introduce some of these questions, feel free to do it. Hopefully won't chase the rabbit too much, but you might get something interesting out of it. So we're going to start off with a meme. And I apologize that the slideshow isn't working right on my Mac, so we're going things this way. How many of you have all been stuck in that situation where you know how to solve the problem, but you have to use a different strategy? I know it drove me nuts. Give y'all a minute there. Well, so many times, otherwise it's the definition of crazy. Let's see. It's the same reason why some have stated here for reading to math. My sense is math is academic reading, but in a less used language. That is an entirely separate rant there, Joseph. I will be happy to give it later on if we have time at the end. But as a physics teacher, there is literally an infinite number of ways to solve any given physics problem. There are certain times when it's a whole lot easier to follow a certain amount of steps. It's a whole lot easier to, do certain things certain way. Honestly, I hated kinematics because most of the time you can do it with the law of conservation of energy much more easy. But what they're really doing is they are limiting the scope. Mary says, I was lucky that my math, geometry, algebra teachers accepted solutions as long as they could be proved. I wish I could do that. But sometimes you need to be able to prove that you can actually do things the way that I want you to do them. But what they're doing most of the time is they're limiting the scope. So in physics, because there's an infinite number of ways to solve any given problem, an infinite number of ways is not terribly accessible. Instead, when people are first starting off and learning a skill, if you give them a specific strategy and a specific task to accomplish, it's a whole lot easier for them to identify later on which strategy is best when you stop giving them that support. So what does this actually look like in terms of academic reading? Well, according to a 2018 University World News article, no one knows how many scientific journals there are. Doesn't matter what databases you subscribe to. Doesn't matter if you go to the Nordic List or Cabell's. There's a lot of people that have a lot of different definitions of scholarly journal. And when you throw in open access, it just becomes incredibly confusing. In fact, it's estimated there are roughly 2 million articles published each year. Now, I don't know about you, but that's a lot. And if you told me that I had to pick from 2 million different options, I would be absolutely paralyzed by choice. A lot of the time when you've got students and you want to encourage them to read about their discipline and read a lot of this content that's coming out, they may or may not know what to read. I mean, there's a reason that there's a whole master's degree course dedicated to learning how to identify what's best to read. It's called, you know, Librarian Information Science. So how can we give our students structure until they are ready to truly navigate everything on their own? Well, I've got another activity for you. Hopefully you have a piece of paper or a, notepad handy. Make a list of the most important journals in your discipline. You have 2 minutes. And we're going to use this for a couple of things. So make a list of the most important journals in your discipline. You have 2 minutes. Zoom, no thank you. I'm looking for my tab. There we go. Make a list of the most important journals in your discipline. You have 2 minutes. Is it cheating to use a LibGuide to answer this question? No, it is not. We will discuss that. Okay. So now we have our 2 minutes are up. So everyone that participated, why don't you put in chat, if you would like, the number of journals you have. Five, nine, four, seven. We've got, of course, 14. Mary says 15. That's quite impressive. Okay. So when we look into this, Janina said about 14. Is it cheating to use a LibGuide to answer this question? Well, if you have a LibGuide to do it, it's quite easy. For the rest of us that were trying to do it from memory, then it's a whole lot more difficult. Have you considered just how powerful it might be to have that LibGuide available for your students or for yourself? To have that reference ready so that other people can go there instead of asking students to build it themselves. In that, we're taking the roughly 2 million or roughly 30,000 journals and dropping it down to a much more manageable number with a lot less effort. See, Heather says, or when a faculty member asks for a list, absolutely. The answer is always, would you like a LibGuide? Okay. Ashley says, I've built that for faculty before within a course guide. I have stolen one of yours. I know that for a fact. So, well, borrowed. You gave me permission, but so a lot of this, when you have that list pre-existing, it lowers the barrier to entry for a lot of this academic reading. Limit the scope, give structure until students can do the structure on their own. Give them a list. It's that easy. So changing gears a bit here. Those of y'all that are in some of these generations, how many of you have a calculator close at hand? I am one of those people that has a TI 84 plus silver that has been through the ringer a couple of times. Janita says, on your phone, on your desktop. Does your phone count? Absolutely. Max says, not anymore. Your roommate stole it. Well, the whole generation of students right now, at least in terms of traditional students, one of the complaints that they always had when stuck in math class was, you tell me I have to do these things, but I will always have a calculator. And the truth is, yes, you will always have a calculator close at hand. Unless you're doing medical math, which is an entirely different beast, there's no reason to focus too hard on not allowing students to use calculators, in my opinion, from as a physics teacher. You know, the truth is, you have to ground your lessons on life outside of school. If you want your students to do something in school, give them something, give them a reason to do it or the ability to do it outside of school. Now, what does that look like in terms of academic reading? Well, what I want you all to look at is your list of all of the journals you've got. And I want you to tell me how many are open access or how many are hybrid open access. Because for a lot of us and a lot of these lists, it's not. And so when our students graduate from our university, because our students truly love graduating, how are they going to be able to continue this habit that we're trying to establish? In our list of definitive journals, it's important to give some open access options so that after they graduate, they still have the ability to follow the academic reading in their discipline. Because academic journals, hundreds of dollars. There's no one journal in any discipline that they need. And let's face it, when you are a recent grad, you are typically not at your most financially able to spend hundreds of dollars on content. Like, let's look at Nature. For a lot of places, Nature is an incredibly definitive journal. And if you are an individual, you pay $200, and this is about a year old, to subscribe. So if we're going to ground all of this and we want our students to read all of these things, we have to give them things that they can read and things that they can follow. So honorable mention, talk to your students about TechShare too. Say, these are all things that you have access to now. If you get in the habit of reading it now, when you graduate, you can go to your public library, and a lot of them, at least if they're in Texas, will have the same things that they can access. Okay, it's looking like we have a handful that are open access and some that are hybrid. But if we want students to continue reading after class, we have to give them that ability to do it. Okay. Moving on. We have a new question. When being introduced to a new concept in elementary math, how many practice problems did you do? Even outside of elementary math, middle school math, high school math, how many problems did you do? Let's see, we've got independent, at least 10. That's decent. 5 to 10. Okay. So pages worth, most of them, and random homework, depending on the teacher, anywhere from 10 to 50. Excellent. When I was a teacher, I generally aimed for requiring, well, I didn't require all that many, but I tried to get them to do 10 to 20. But one of the things that in math and physics we look at is it's very important to repeat to build pattern recognition. The lesson is not in being able to do it once. The ability is to do it in multiple ones so that you can see the pattern, so that you can build your understanding of those patterns. Now, I stopped teaching physics in 2020, and so this is about 4 years out of date, but I'm willing to bet we're still going to see some trends. But why am I harping on this as much as I am? Well, most of the juniors and seniors that I taught believed that if they can demonstrate mastery with one question, then they're good. They don't need to learn anymore. They can work on other things. And one of the things that kind of worries me is here at WT, we used to have every one of the electricity and optics lab classes come to the library for library instruction. And their assignment was to find a physics-related article and write about it. Now, if that is your one question to demonstrate mastery, do you really need a lot of research skills? Or will one quick search really get you all you need? So a lot of the students, at least in my experience, they believe that if they can complete that one question, they stop learning. And then when it comes time for the test, when it comes time for the paper, they can't do the variant questions. They can't do all of the other edge cases. They can't do the things that they're actually being given a major grade for. So in my class, one of the readings that I encouraged, I'm going to go ahead and drop these into the chat because I just love them so much. Now, this is a pair of articles in Wired magazine, and it's all about repetition and practice. That telling you the answer isn't the answer. and that this is hard and you need to accept that so you can be successful. Now, what does this pattern actually look like in higher education? Well, a student successfully completes one find an article and write about it assignment. Student decides academic reading isn't hard and doesn't practice. And then they are the person chatting into you at 3 a.m. on a Sunday, trying to figure out how to do research. One of the questions that I ask all of my instruction classes is, do you already know how to do research? And almost inevitably, more than a third of the class feels like they do. Even when you have high schoolers in here, they feel like they do. So a lot of them roll their eyes and say, well, we don't need to learn this. Well, you do, and there's ways we can help you do that. And because this strategy is very closely tied into the next strategy, I'm going to give you the practical applications of this strategy here in a minute. And I apologize if I'm going fast. So, changing gears here. How many times were you given a rubric for partial credit in math or physics class? And for those of y'all that might have taught it, have you actually sat down and created a rubric for partial credit in math or physics? We've got some law, we've got some never. Well, I had one. And the point of this one is, see, Janina says, this is 1990 to 1990, never given a rubric, did in calculus, was thankful for it in chemistry. Well, when you're given a rubric, it helps you not just get a good grade, it helps you identify the skill that you need to work on and actually give you the ability to work on it. So physics is, well, very little physics is actually physics. In my class, identifying the variables, typically they were given word problems. That skill is not physics, that skill is reading. Being able to identify the variables in a word problem, that's reading. Okay, choosing the correct formula and inputting the numbers correctly, that's the physics. That's the physics. Choosing the correct formula is the majority of the physics in the actual text. And then doing the math right to actually resolve the answer, that's algebra. Like, we all say that physics is a math class, but really, the algebra is, if you struggle with algebra, then maybe you don't need to talk to your physics teacher. Maybe if you're more comfortable with your algebra teacher, go to them. And so when you actually identify and intentionally demonstrate what skills people are using, then when they have problems, they know who to go to. They know what skill to practice. And so in research here, this is something we can do all over the place. So strategy 4 is to intentionally teach and include skills. And students can refine a skill if they know what they need to refine. So when doing this in more of an academic reading context, this is a whole lot more helpful for faculty and people that are actually doing multi-shots rather than a one-shot. Tell your students, explicitly state that one of your goals is to build reading habits and make finding articles feel trivial. And then use those activities. You can put in the repetition and say, we are going to be practicing these skills. We're going to be doing it multiple times. This is why we're going to be doing it. We want to make these skills feel trivial. So one of my favorite things is the 2+1 discussion board. So oftentimes, at least for me in grad school, discussion boards, they asked students to compare two readings, typically two readings that oppose each other. So if you've already got two readings, bring in a third. Have your students find an article that applies to the discussion, bring it in, and tell about how it in context either agrees or disagrees with some of the things. Sometimes when those two articles that you're being read are from, the 1920s or, you know, out of date. So require students to bring in a more up-to-date one. This makes students typically have to find at least an article every week. And if you're going to comment on someone, if they brought in a separate article, well, you have to go then read that article. You're getting that repetition and you're getting those intentional skills. Current events. People really kind of underestimate the power of current events. So there's roughly 2 million articles published in a year. Have your students find one of interest each week and share it. It's interest-based. If students don't have to necessarily link it to anything specific, then they can really go through and you can learn more about what your students are interested and what they might be successful at the next academic level. And you can make it low stakes if you want. There's all kinds of stuff out there. If you just want to make it a minor little 5-minute discussion at the beginning of each class saying, hey, what is an interesting academic article that you read in the last week? Those students will come up with a whole bunch of very interesting things. Especially when you've got grad students, most of them are just doing this anyway. So it's very easy. And finally, this is something that I learned about when I taught K-12. It's called My Favorite No. The basic idea with My Favorite No is it brings in, or it allows you to highlight a misunderstanding that is interesting or compelling. It allows you to say, yes, this is wrong, but here is why it's interesting that this is wrong. For an example I have is, I'm going to go ahead and drop this in the chat too, because it is just an absolutely wonderful read. Cigarette smoking, an underused tool in high performance endurance training. And if you ever use this article, I can tell you from experience, 1 out of 30 faculty members will actually identify that it says satire in the top left corner. So the purpose of this article is to demonstrate that cherry picking data can lead to some pretty wild assumptions and bring or support arguments that we know are wrong. But it's scholarly, it's academic. It was published in one of the Canadian medical journals. So if you have a class where things might be controversial, play My Favorite No, bring in My Favorite No. Even in general, just having a favorite no can be quite an entertaining exercise. So let's do it. Let's take a minute or two. And if anyone has one off the top of your head, what is your favorite no? And it's fair if you don't have one. Well, it seems like no one has a My Favorite No handy, but Then again, let's see, we've got Patrick says the Turner thesis. The War of the Worlds didn't actually cause mass panic. Interesting. So if you think about it, there's a lot of people that have a favorite no, and their favorite no really tells a lot about them and their academic interests. So, in the name of time, I have a question for you all. Did your science teacher ever light the school on fire? Ashley, I know for a fact that is incorrect. Mr. Cummings lit the school on fire many times. At least 6 while I was in AP Chem. See, we've got no, they didn't even try. It was sad. Um, at least a desk in the classroom. Did leave for psych reasons? Interesting. No, but we, the students that the physics lab on fire, we were in the chem room. See, Janina says, kinda, depending on if you mean metaphorically. No, but my dad did when they built a flamethrower. That sounds amazing. But yes, when I taught, I lit the school on fire a couple of times. Jacob's ladders are lots of fun. Um, I had a couple of students for a project do the battery and gum wrapper thing, and that turned out to be a mistake. But why do we do this? Well, we're advertising science. We are showing ourselves that science is cool. We are watching a commercial for science when our teachers do the fun demos and the fun labs. So do the fun stuff. What does that look like in terms of academic reading? Well, you can advertise articles to yourself. I know this sounds kind of silly, but when we go to Google Scholar and we make a search for, yeah, test the coils in shrimp, right here, create an alert. You don't have to include less relevance with results if you want to or not, but you can just go in there and create alerts. I just realized some of my alerts are kind of silly. And I don't have Kentucky Fried Chicken on there anymore. That's quite odd. But what this does is it gives you an overview every couple of days of the last couple of articles that are results for that search. And even if you don't end up reading well, you probably won't end up reading every one of those, but it'll make you stop every couple of days and say, huh, that's interesting. Maybe you go on to read something. Maybe you don't. Maybe all you do with this is just follow what the conversation is in your discipline. With generative AI, do we still need unis? Well, yes, but there's a lot of different articles in there, and just setting up these alerts either from Google Scholar or a lot of journals these days and databases allow you to set up alerts for specific journals or specific topics. And one of the things you can really do is either with your class or even with your coworkers, just begin a low stakes discussion of what was on your alerts, what was interesting, what might you want to look up later. And that gives you a very low stakes entry to a lot of very interesting conversations. Okay. And finally, I'm going to go real quick. Reward effort. Students will try if they know they get something for it. What does that mean? Well, you can have very low stakes ways of rewarding behaviors. Just be interested in the things that your students give you. If your student finds a really wacky article, be interested in it, discuss it, read it. Help students find ways to turn their reading into research or publication. If they come to you with this article that they just think is the worst thing in the world, then help them do research, help them actually write a literature review on it, maybe do some research for it. Ask students to send you articles. That keeps you abreast of the things that students are interested in, and then you can sit there and you can mention some of those things. And finally, the most important one is if a student brings you something, acknowledge that student. Maybe that student isn't there, maybe they are, but if you say that so and so brought me this, that will ultimately get back to the student. And the students will say, oh, you respect us as students, you respect our ability to produce academic content, or at least to read academic content, which is, what we're really after here. But in summary, limit the scope, give structure until it's needed, or give structure until it is unneeded. Ground your lessons on life outside of school. If you want students to do something in school, give them a reason to do it outside of school. Here's a great place for looking at open access. Repeat to build pattern recognition. You can't demonstrate mastery in one question. Don't ask your students to do that. Build in ways that they can repeat and do things again and again. Intentionally teach and include skills. Students can refine a skill if they can identify the skill to refine. Finally, advertise science. Do the fun stuff. And finally, reward effort. Students will try if they know they will get something for it. So, do we have any questions? I know we don't have a ton of time, but I am interested. What questions do you have for me? No one? Okay. See, we've got love the my favorite no. Okay. It is a very interesting thing that you can do. In K-12, they do it with sticky notes on the wall. But, it's a you have to do it right to make sure you don't embarrass your students, but so you were quite thorough, question mark. Can I explain the squirrels? Okay. I am a fan of when I am doing library instruction of giving students really off the wall questions. And so oftentimes we will talk about squirrels, we will talk about pickles, we will talk about Tesla coils and shrimps. We will talk about Kentucky Fried Chicken. There is a surprising amount of academic research or scholarly articles on fried chicken that is not from Kentucky in the last 5 years. And most of it's either in Indonesian or Filipino language. Um, so yeah, I'm a bit of a goofball. See, we've got Janina. Thank you. As a soon-to-be shiny new librarian, you shared lots of great information. I also appreciate the science perspective. Thank you. So yes, there is yeah. And then to go back to the squirrels, there's a lot of academic research on squirrels, and it's not where you think it is. Okay. See, we got no questions. Thanks for presentation with physics. Interesting. Let's see.
I have a question, Bruce.
Sure.
If anyone has any questions later for you, is there any way that folks can reach you?
Oh, absolutely. Just send me an email. Yeah, I'm happy to answer any sorts of questions that you might have, or um, if you need the complete goofball perspective on library instruction, then I'm good for that too.
Well, thank you so much, Bruce, for your presentation. Folks want to give a virtual round of applause. This concludes this presentation. I put a link in the chat that will take you to our survey. We welcome your feedback, again, about this presentation. So thank you all again. In the interest of making sure we smoothly transition to the final presentations for today, we will conclude. Thank you all.